Just a day ahead of the booster dose budget, Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman has presented on the floor of the House the economic survey. What are the key indications and what can we draw about what to expect in the union budget tomorrow? You're watching India Today and Business Today's live and continuing coverage of the economic survey first and then the union budget. I've got Siddharth Zarabi, managing editor BTTV, joining me as well. Welcome, Siddharth. And at this time, we've got with us for perspective Vice Chairperson of the NITI Aayog, Dr. Rajiv Kumar, joining us on this broadcast. One of the key highlights of the economic survey is a projection of a GDP growth rate of between 8 and 8.5. I want to walk across to the budget intelligence dashboard as I welcome Dr. Kumar and show you where the GDP story has been so far. And we saw, Dr. Rajiv Kumar, recently the IMF projected, now you're projecting for next year 8 to 8.5. The IMF had a projection of more than 9%. So you're being conservative in comparison with the International Monetary Fund. Why is it that you believe that the Indian GDP will grow between 8 to 8.5 in comparison with the more optimistic projections we're seeing from abroad?
Hi Rahul, good to be here. And I think government is being more conservative simply to, not be surprised on the downside. Can you hear me?
We hear you well. Go on, please.
Yeah. So not to be surprised on the downside. I think these estimates are based on our own realistic assumptions of how the different sectors will play out, and how private investment and demand and consumption, will rise in the next year. So I think it is always better to be surprised on the upside. And there is therefore, just like last year, the budget had very conservative numbers on revenues and on growth, etc. Similarly, this year, this government is in the business of making realistic assumptions and estimates rather than going overboard. So that's the story essentially. And the fact is that we are not sure about the uncertainty. And what the economic survey points out is that this government has now got into a policy approach which responds to the changing parameters, changing data, the variables, what it calls the agile approach. So as things pan out, and if we don't have the uncertainty because of Omicron, etc., these estimates will of course be revised upwards.
Rajiv Kumar, what do you think the priority should be when it comes to next year's finances of the central government? Inflation control or continuing growth? Because you explained the context of the survey, which is for the current year. But if we look ahead, what priorities would you be setting?
So clearly growth, Siddharth. Clearly growth, simply because I think, one, the government, the finance minister's primary responsibility is the fiscal policy, and there we have done very well. I think there's a huge amount of fiscal space available for the government to ramp up its capex, which already rose by 15% this year. And I think the government should be doing whatever it can to ramp up growth in different sectors, both especially in manufacturing and in services, where agriculture has done well. Inflation, is a global phenomenon at the moment, and I think and it's not a demand-led phenomena. It's a result, surprisingly this time, of supply-side bottlenecks and supply-side constraints, and I think those are going to be taken care of as we go forward. And so, therefore, we can think about inflation being more transitory than permanent, and therefore, policy response should be to promote growth, rather than at the moment focus on, especially fiscal policy response, rather than to be focused on inflation.
Just this afternoon, the government has announced through the DPAM secretary that Neelachal Ispat Nigam is being sold to Tata Steel Long Products at 12,100 crores. Over the last few days, we've had a lot of talk about Air India finally being taken over by the Tatas and that disinvestment going through. And on the budget intelligence dashboard, I want to show our viewers where you are in terms of the target which was given for the previous year which obviously won't get realized. And that's been the case. If you see from FY16 onwards, where 61% of the disinvestment target was realized, then in FY20, 48% was realized, 16% in FY21. The target for this year was 1.75 lakh crores. You're nowhere close to achieving that. Are you hoping that the Indian disinvestment privatization story will finally kick into fifth gear, Dr. Kumar?
Absolutely. You're just right to talk about the fifth gear, because I think the Neelachal Ispat announcement along with the Air India now shows that the public support is behind this move. And this is very big news. Both of these have been announced. The LIC IPO has been announced, and that will get in a lot of funds, etc. And I think the target again will be substantially achieved in the next 2 months, which remain in this fiscal year. But I think the momentum is now there, and the process is clear. The machinery is well oiled, and as I repeat myself, the public support, in the public domain, is now behind improving efficiencies in the public sector. And that is what makes me feel very optimistic that finally we've got this act together and we will be able to drive much higher efficiencies in the public sector through privatization, through public-private partnerships, etc. And don't be surprised if you hear more going forward in the next 2 months, apart from the LIC, which is going to be a big deal, this investment of the LIC, where I'm sure even the foreign investors will be allowed to participate. So privatization is finally now off the blocks in a firm way, and will be achieved, and will achieve its targets going forward.
Well, Rahul, Mr. Kumar makes an important point, and if we were to use a tennis analogy, it's like being down 2 sets and coming back on disinvestment, because
you want him to do a Rafael Nadal.
Clearly something is going to happen. 2 quick questions. The first one, do you think Bharat Petroleum is off the radar because this global move towards clean energy and the pandemic impact? Mr. Kumar, and then I want a quick follow-up on that.
No, I'm not sure about Bharat Petroleum at the moment, but I think you're right. The investor interest could be a bit weak, but at the same time, the petroleum prices are now beginning to go up again. So there could be again an active interest. But I'm not privy to what's happened to BP. But let me say that's something still in the pipeline as we go forward.
Mr. Kumar, explain to our viewers, and many of them have paid through their nose when it comes to fuel excise. In November, the government did cut it, and that was a relief. And the government has always been saying that prices are free, in the sense that companies are free to set them every day. Then why for the last 80 plus days have oil companies not raised prices? Is it because of elections? And this is during a period where crude oil has gone up almost 50%. How do we trust the management of the oil account and the excise duty management that we have seen over the past year?
That I don't know the nitty-gritties of how the oil companies work, but I think there is a difference between global oil prices and the average price of the Indian basket, as it is called. And the Indian price of the Indian basket is very often based on long-term contracts that have been reached in the past. And these might well be supplies that are coming in at prices which are settled earlier before the rising prices, global prices took off at this point of time. So it just could be a lagged effect, and you could find that the oil companies will adjust their prices in line with the rising oil prices as we go forward. But I mean, the difference between global oil prices and the price of the Indian basket should be recognized.
There's been a lot of talk, Dr. Kumar, about a K-shaped recovery. The fact that while the government only talks of a V-shaped recovery, talking about a quick bounce back, those at the lower income strata of the economic pyramid have actually got poor. I want to show you unemployment numbers on the budget intelligence dashboard and get you to talk about your thoughts on the economic recovery that we're seeing actually being K-shaped. Because if you look at data put out by the Center for the Monitoring of the Indian Economy, for December 21, which is the last data set that we have, the monthly unemployment average has been about 7.9%. And given the fact that unemployment is high, given the fact that especially in rural India, amongst those who are poorer, there's been distress, as also amongst the urban poor, how do you see the government grappling with the challenge of the recovery being K-shaped?
Yeah, Rahul, the government's focus is on generating employment. And that's the focus which has led us to declare the production-linked incentive scheme across 14 sectors, with an outlay of 1.97 lakh crores. Now, these sectors are expected to generate more than 60 lakh jobs in the manufacturing sector. And not only that, but I mean, they will attract, they will crowd in investments in their vendors, in their, in the supply chains, etc. So that's what is going to drive, drive employment upwards. Furthermore, the government, cognizant of this, has, as you know, now got the 3 labor laws to be codified, and these will be notified very soon. Moreover, along with the PLI schemes, you've got the cleaning up of the regulatory burden or the compliance burden, and the redefinition of the small and medium enterprises, so that they can now begin to generate more employment. Finally, I think the export story, and the exports, as you know, are employment intensive. That's that growth, and the April to December export figures of more than $300 billion being 50% up the previous year shows that will drive employment growth as we go forward, and the global economic recovery still remains strong. So government is, of course, cognizant of the employment situation and is doing whatever it can to generate the employment in a sustained manner, in a sustainable manner, and not in a manner which will just create a flash in the pan and then fall off. Last thing here is the government's focus on infrastructure and capex and construction, because that is what generates employment again on a sustained manner. So the K-shaped recovery that you talked about, the government is cognizant of that and is working towards getting employment generation up and running on a sustained manner, as I explained earlier.
As an economist, Dr. Kumar, how would you respond to these concerns that this K-shaped recovery also has another element? The rich have been getting richer. The poor, while they've been supported by the government, and there's no denying that, there is considerable stress in the low income groups. And you have a situation where your government cut taxes in 2019 for corporate India to boost manufacturing. Again, welcome. But look at the Aam Aadmi. Medical expenses have gone up. Health insurance is taxed every year, annual premium at 18%. The Aam Aadmi, the taxpayer, the middle class is sandwiched in between a situation where perhaps not enough attention is being paid to them. How would you respond to that as an economist?
Siddharth, as an economist and as a citizen of the country, I have to say that I don't agree with you that the government has not paid attention to the middle class. The government has launched the Ayushman Bharat with 60,000 crore outlay to take care of the medical health expenses of the middle class and the lower middle class. The government has transferred 1,40,000 crores for 11 crore rural households to take care of them. The government has taken care of the food grain requirement of nearly 80 crore of the people, and giving them free food grains going in the last 2 years. The government has now vaccinated more than 150, delivered 150 crores and 90% vaccination. So the government is, of course, taking care of the middle class and of the poorer classes. All these schemes that are either, that you talk about, the water, the Jal Jeevan mission or the others, are all there to take care of those who are at the bottom of the pyramid. So therefore, this government, of all governments, I think, is sharply focused to ensure that the living standards of either the middle class or of those at the bottom of the pyramid do not deteriorate despite the shocks that we have received in the last 2 years.
Dr. Kumar, what's the thinking in the government, and particularly the NITI Aayog at this moment, when it comes to cryptocurrencies? There was a lot of chatter about the government possibly coming out with a cryptocurrency regulation bill in the previous session of Parliament. That ultimately didn't happen. It was held back for a later day. Where are you now in terms of the thinking within the government on how to deal with the whole phenomena of digital currencies?
I mean, this is, Rahul, I have to put a straight, very clear caveat that this is a personal view that I'm putting forward and not that of the government. And I have to start off by saying that this crypto genie is out of the bottle. And this genie cannot be put back into the bottle by any means. It's what some people have called it is unstoppable, given its nature, given its structure, given that it is so decentralized, and it is what is called a trustless-based system that people are getting onto it and going forward. So what we think is important is to devise the right kind of regulatory framework to make sure that that consumer interests, the young people or the old middle class people who invest on this are properly protected. So what therefore we need is to design a regulation that are saying that on-ramp and off-ramp activities of the exchanges are properly and sharply focused, so that they do the proper KYCs. They are in the business of not admitting Ponzi schemes on their exchanges, and they are regulated as best as we can.
Can I press you further to explain what you see as being the ideal regulation? You've obviously got a framework in mind. Who do you see play regulator? Who do you think should be entrusted, and how do we ensure that customers aren't taken for a ride?
Those are questions that are, of course, on the table at the moment. You're right in asking those questions, but I'm afraid I'll not be able to answer those. Except to say that the regulators are there, and the regulators need to be have become conscious of it, and the government is cognizant of the fact that such a regulation needs to be devised. But all options are open at the moment. Let me add to that. All options are open at the moment, and let's see how the approach comes out as we go forward.
One quick question, Dr. Kumar. In 2015, the NDA government said the direct taxes code needed to be relooked, and we haven't heard much. Is it time for a fresh initiative to rationalize our direct taxes code? It causes a lot of pain also, as you are aware, to both individuals and companies, despite all the rationalization that has happened during this government's tenure. Would you personally support a fresh initiative in this regard?
Siddharth, there is so much going on at the moment to come out of the pandemic and put the economy back on rails, as it were, on a sustained path of 8.5%, 9% rate of growth going forward. And given, as you say yourself, that a lot of rationalization is taking place already, I think there is, the policy agenda is pretty full. And I think at the moment, while a direct, a relook at the direct tax code is of course, welcome, but I'm not sure that we need to be in a great hurry, in a tearing hurry, to be able to do that. The direct tax regime has been rationalized. The corporate tax rates have been brought down. The individual tax, then the individual net has been widened. And I think and by the way, a number of other things, which is the appeals, level has gone up, at what you can get. The retrospective tax has been withdrawn. So I think a lot has been done, and I think we can take a breath, while the economy finds itself, on the tracks for sustained and rapid recovery moving forward.
One of the big thrust areas for the government in the year gone by, and a reform that was spoken of with great passion, was on farm reform. Given the fact that there was a huge protest in Uttar Pradesh, in Punjab, parts of Haryana, the government's now called back the farm laws that were brought in. What is the thinking currently? Because we've spoken to you personally and to others in government who are passionate advocates of those farm reforms, but those turned out to be politically very expensive. The government cut its losses, pulled back. Therefore, and given the need, the imperative for those farm reforms, how do you see these two issues being dealt with in the months to come? The need to actually reform Indian agriculture, and the need also for the Modi Sarkar to contain the political blowback.
Yeah, Rahul, I think it's too early days for us to now comment on the follow-up on the reform, on the farm laws that we got. I think at the moment, the Prime Minister's focus on the propagation of natural farming which is meant to improve farmers' incomes, improve agroecology, improve the returns to the farmers, as well as cut down costs and reduce the consumption of water, etc. I think that's what's going to be most important to help the poor and the marginal farmer, and the small and marginal farmer. I think let's focus on those, and let's come and provide the marketing and logistics support for our farming community before we go back to a review of what else might be needed at the moment, in place of the repealed farm laws.
No, but can I press you further to say that when the farm laws were brought, changes in the labor code as well, there was a sense in India and internationally that finally the government seemed to be finding the appetite to push ahead on tough-to-bite reform. Given that you've now pulled back on reform, you're very cagey and very naturally so about saying anything about what might happen in future. Would that then suggest, while we're seeing privatization play itself out, would that suggest when it comes to structural reforms in the way the governance architecture exists, the government would now be you've got UP right now, you've got Gujarat later in the year, and therefore, let's not take a panga, let's just go a little easy.
You guys are the political pundits, I'm not. I restrict myself to the economy and the economics. And what I want to say here is that, this government has not been shy of taking the toughest structural reforms, in its tenure. It has taken a large number of them, whether it's the GST or it's the IBC or it's the banking sector. They have announced the last budget, the banking sector privatization. It's the privatization itself, which was hanging fire for years together. I think this is one, and I was in the government during 91 to 95, and so therefore I say this with some experience, that the toughest of reforms have been taken by this government, and will have laid the foundation for, in my view, a sustained, rapid and equitable growth going forward. So let's not talk about the government being scared of reforms. At the same time, as the economic survey points out very nicely, is that this government is also in the business of having an agile approach to policy making. An approach which maximizes flexibility, and an approach which responds to the changing indicators, or economic indicators in real time. And I think that is what the government will continue to do, to respond effectively and with flexibility and agility to the emerging economic situations in the country.
We'll leave it over there. We hope to have you back with us, Dr. Rajiv Kumar, after the budget. Thank you so much for your time. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rahul. Thank you, Siddharth.
Take
All
care.
the best.
Stay well. Bye-bye.
Bye.
We'll slip into a quick break. A lot coming up on the other side. Also, remember, starting 7 a.m., the 1st of February, you can watch India Today and Business Today's live and continuing coverage of the booster shot budget. Two mega brands coming together with 30 years plus of reporting experience in the budget. This is a set of television coverage which you simply cannot afford to miss. So do mark out your calendar, 7 a.m. We start tomorrow morning. See you.
Bye-bye.